Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 5-minute Bible study series. Today, we are talking about the very last chapter of 1 Kings, and then we're going to move on to 2 Kings. The story is pretty much just a continuation of 1 Kings, and so not a lot is going to change. But in this last chapter, we are going to see the death of some significant characters that we've been talking about for quite a while, significant in the history of Israel and Judah, specifically Israel, the northern kingdom. And so let's get into it. The PDF is available on our website for free download if you want it. And let's talk about the last chapter of 1 Kings. We've been talking a lot about King Ahab, and we're also going to talk about a king named Ahaziah. They were both kings over Israel, and their reign probably fits within the window of about 920 BC to 890 BC. Jehoshaphat, who was the king in Judah, his reign also fits within that window. Who are the important figures in this chapter? We have Ahab, who the Bible describes in a very negative way. It says, quote, "There was none who sold himself to do what was evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel his wife incited. He acted very abominably in going after idols." That's chapter 21, verse 25 through 26. We're also going to talk about Jehoshaphat, who I mentioned was the king in Judah, which was the southern kingdom. He actually made peace with Israel. There had been a ton of fighting between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah for years, but Jehoshaphat actually allows these two kingdoms to become allies. We're actually going to see them fighting alongside one another against a common enemy in chapter 22. Two other important figures, a guy named Micaiah. He was a prophet of God, and Ahab really hated him because he never said anything good about Ahab, and he won't in this chapter either. And then finally, Ahaziah, which was Ahab's son who became king after him. Before we leave our character section, I want to mention this, and it'll probably take us over time, but it's really important, and that is that if you're confused about the kings and the names of the kings, don't worry, you're not the only one. We mentioned Ahaziah here. There's an Ahaziah who reigns as king over Israel. There's also an Ahaziah who reigns as king over Judah. We're also going to meet a guy named Jehoram, who has another name, Joram. He's the king of Judah. But we also are going to meet another guy whose name is Jehoram, also known as Joram, who is the king over Israel. And so if over the next couple chapters you find yourself like really confused about who these kings are and their names and like you're frustrated because you can't keep them straight, don't worry. That's pretty much every Bible student who's ever gone through the Old Testament. I've been studying for like 33 years now and learning the Bible, still have an incredible amount of trouble keeping the kings of Israel and Judah straight. So what I am going to try to do is put together a timeline so you can visually see where these guys fit in, and you can see these kings who are named the exact same thing, but are ruling in different parts of the kingdom. So yeah, just know if the next couple chapters have got your brain all messed up, you're doing as well as everybody else. Now, go to our map section. We're going to talk about Ahab and Jehoshaphat making battle plans at Samaria, the capital of Israel. Then we're going to move over to the other side of the Jordan River. Israel and Judah allied together to fight against the Syrians at a place called Ramoth-gilead, which is just to the in the very northern part, on the right side of the fork of the territory of Gad. All right, let's break this last chapter of 1 Kings down. Verses 1 through 28 is our first section. Micaiah prophesies Ahab's death in battle. This is going to be the last chapter where King Ahab is a main character, although his poor influence is going to permeate for generations, the nation of Israel. After a period of peace between the Syrians and the people of Israel, Jehoshaphat asked Ahab to drive the Syrians out of the city of Ramoth-gilead, because that had once belonged to the people of God, but the Syrians had been occupying it. Jehoshaphat agreed to come up from Judah and to help Ahab to do this job, and they determined, though, that they were going to ask for God's counsel before they did anything. Ahab gathered 400 prophets, and they all confirmed the same thing. They said, if you and Jehoshaphat go to battle at Ramoth-gilead against the Syrians, God will give you victory. But Jehoshaphat wasn't quite convinced by this. Maybe he knew that Ahab had a habit of surrounding himself with a bunch of yes men, and he asked Ahab if there were any other prophets in Israel that they could perhaps consult on this matter. And Ahab said, yeah, there's this one guy, his name's Micaiah, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me. Well, in the end, Micaiah was summoned, and he did have a bit of a different message. God had revealed a vision to him. And it's quite an interesting vision. I'm not sure there's anything quite like it in the rest of the Old Testament, but he told Ahab that in the vision, God was on his throne, asking his heavenly servants which one of them would go and entice King Ahab to go to battle against the people of Ramoth-gilead, or the Syrians at Ramoth-gilead. One spirit went to God and accepted the job, and God asked the spirit how he proposed to entice Ahab to go to battle. And the spirit responded that it would put a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets who advised Ahab to entice him to battle, and God could destroy him that way. God accepted the spirit's proposal and sent him to complete the work. So basically, Micaiah was warning Ahab, he was telling Ahab that God was allowing these 400 prophets to give him bad advice because God intended to destroy Ahab in the battle because of his years and years of wickedness. Well, and surprisingly, Ahab and the rest of the 400 prophets didn't really like what Micaiah had to say, so they threw him in jail. Now that finally takes us to section number 2, verses 29 through 40. Ahab is indeed killed in a battle with the Syrians. Jehoshaphat and Ahab got together against the words of Micaiah, thinking that maybe there was a way to avoid what he had prophesied. They went up to battle at Ramoth-gilead with the Syrians. Ahab disguised himself. It seems like he feared that Micaiah's words might come true, so he disguised himself, and the Syrian commanders were given specific instructions to hunt down Ahab, but they couldn't find him in his disguise. But the text says that God intervenes here. An archer, quote, drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the scale armor and the breastplate. So this shot seems to be random, but God is actually the one who is fulfilling his prophecy given through Micaiah that Ahab is going to die. We'll talk about that more in the application section. The battle ended up lasting all day. Ahab was propped up in his chariot, injured, but he eventually died. And then the army of Israel scattered. The text tells us that Ahab's blood was washed out of the chariot at the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked it up, just as Elijah had prophesied in chapter 21, verse 19. Our last two sections are rather short. They just tell us about the succession of the line of kings in Israel and Judah moving forward. Verses 41 through 50, Jehoshaphat is king of Judah. So Jehoshaphat reigned over Judah for 25 years. For the most part, he, quote, did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And then verses 51 through 53, Ahaziah becomes king in Israel. So Ahab's son, Ahaziah, took the throne after his father's death, but he only reigned 2 years. He, quote, did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, just like his father. Now we can go down to our application section, and the application for today is this. Not everything is random that appears random. I've been kind of fascinated with this idea of the intricate details of how providence works, especially as we've been going through the Old Testament. And this application is about that, and I think we see it in a really incredible way in this chapter. Even as Christians, we often speak about luck and about chance. But this chapter reveals that many of the things that we might label luck or chance actually are God-directed. And the best example of this is the arrow that strikes Ahab. The text even says that the archer drew it at random, right? But of course we know from the prophecy of Micaiah that it wasn't actually random. Think about this shot, this random shot. The angle of the shot, how the archer tilted his bow, the wind speed at the time and the direction that the wind was blowing, the feathers of the arrow, right, which affect its flight, and the draw weight of the bow, how much force it takes to draw the string back. All of those were factors that affected the way and where this arrow flew. And not to mention the location of Ahab, the type of armor that he was wearing that day, where the holes in his armor were that could potentially be pierced by an arrow. So you think about all these factors. These were all what we might consider to be just chance variables, right? And that's the way that they appear to the human eye, and that's even the way that the writer presents them. But they were not chance variables. They were precise calculations by God. Every single one of those variables had been calculated for, and he uses human beings to carry out his will. So when we understand this one incident, it opens our eyes to the fact that the happenstances of our world may not actually be happenstances at all, and God can be working, in tiny ways that we never observe, bringing about his work and his will, which is just an incredible thought, at least to me. So that's the application for today, and that is the book of 1 Kings.